All right, friends. Hello, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. Woohoo! Welcome again. It's good to see all of you all here. And I want to get started right away today because we have so much stuff today to cover. Uh, a whole chapter of the Gospel of John. That's a lot, isn't it? So, a day in the life of Jesus Christ. That's kind of the title today as we move into this most powerful gospel lesson. Before we do, though, I want to just share a little PR announcement with you all. Anybody here love to travel? Good, because guess what? In 2025, we're working on getting a Rhine River cruise together down the Rhine River to the Rhine castles and the Swiss Alps. Looking forward to that on June 15th of 2025. We'll be heading to France, Germany, the Netherlands, and to Switzerland. And it's on this beautiful cruise ship where everything is all inclusive. So that's coming up on June 15th. I'll be leading that trip with two of my best friends from seminary, Tim Klinkenberg and Tim Runch, the Tims I call them, serving churches in Los Angeles and Colorado and Fort Collins. And the three of us are hoping to get 40 people from each of our churches together, and we'll fill up that whole ship with Lutherans. Right? That's the plan. So if you want to know some more about that, I've got the brochures over on the table over there that you can grab and find out some information about it. And then another little fun twist to this, we have an optional add-on at the end. We'll be touring the Lutherlands for a Reformation tour, where we'll stop at Wartburg and Erfurt and Eisleben, Wittenberg, Berlin, tour all the Lutherlands of the Reformation. And so since we're there already, it's a pretty cheap add-on since you don't have to put the flight in and everything again. So that's an optional add-on to that, which would begin on June 23rd. And I have some plans to do like a couple Bible studies before we go, just to sort of get familiar with the Reformation and the places that we'll visit and the castles and the churches where Luther preached at, all the bars where he drank beer, and we're going to have to warm up on that at these studies. So.
And do you know there is beer available on that?
I do know that.
At no extra
I
charge
do know that.
for breakfast, for lunch,
And wine.
and wine.
So anyway, you guys, I know how much you all love each other in class. It would be fun if we could just fill the ship with our class, right? But anyway, if you're interested and want more information, there's a brochure over there. And next Thursday, not this Thursday coming up this week, but the Thursday after, at 7 o'clock, we'll have an informational meeting in the music media room where I can give you a lot more of the details of what it will be like, and you can ask any questions that you have, things like that. So this is the ship that will be going on. Yep, that'll be our little river cruise ship. There's a little village in the Swiss Alps that we'll visit. There's some of the Lutherland things that we'll tour. Yep. I know, it's going to be cool. All right, so anyway, I'm excited to do some traveling. That's the summer of 2025. All right, so tonight we're going to do John chapter 19. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm a little nervous that I'm not going to get through this class. I cried a dozen times, and I'm not making that up, as I was putting the PowerPoint together. Because, all the pictures and stuff that you see, I searched through all kinds of places to find the pictures, and just working through finding the pictures of the crucifixion and the beating and the taunting and Jesus and Mary and it's just, this is a powerful chapter of Scripture that we're going to get at today. John, the eyewitness, gives us some pictures that are truly breathtaking. So strap on your big boy and big girl shoes, and let's get ready to really dig into the greatest and yet saddest event in human history, right? So we'll start with prayer. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, God, I pray that you would just be with us, that we can do justice to the miracle and the majesty and the power of the cross, the crucifixion. God, what you did for us, what Jesus willingly took upon himself for us, that we might be forgiven and brought into your family is just remarkable. And so through the eyes of John tonight, an eyewitness to these events, we pray that you would help us to see the extent of your love, a love that has no limits, a love that would give anything, do anything, suffer anything for us so that we might be forgiven. So God, just use this chapter to help us fall all the more in love with you and appreciate all that you've done for us in Christ. So just be with us. That's all I can ask, God, and that we can appreciate what you've done for us in Jesus. In his name we pray, amen. See, I told you I'm doomed this today. All right, so, as we look at this, I just want to be clear that what we're talking about is not a history lesson tonight. We're not talking about an event that happened 2,000 years ago, like in school when you would study your history, things about Washington crossing the Delaware, things like that. This is not history. This cross and what Jesus did for us is an everyday kind of thing. It's not just something that we should look at on Good Friday, right? Talk about the cross and the crucifixion of Christ on Good Friday. We do that every Good Friday, but it's more than that. By the way, this Good Friday, if any of you were near me this Good Friday, it's the first time I was ever able to sit in the congregation for a Friday Tenebrae service, because I'm always up front doing something, but the other two guys were here, so I got to sit with my family, and I cried like a baby through that whole thing. My wife kept giving me the elbow, and it's like, you're embarrassing me, and I'm like, it's a lot harder here than it is up there. But the power of the Good Friday thing, it's not just for Good Friday what Jesus did. It's a story for all of us, for every day of our lives. Because that event was for all people for all time. That event has far-reaching implications for folks that lived long before it and folks who lived long after it. The cross and the crucifixion of Christ touches every one of us each and every day. So tonight we'll want to make sure that what we study is not just something 2,000 years old, but something that impacts us right now and every minute of every day. That's the hope. So what we're going to get at this, here's, if you've been reading through the Gospel of John, John 19 is almost a standalone little chapter in the Bible. It's John's, what I call, a day in the life of Jesus story. Now, I'm sure you've all seen those day in the life books, right? Right? I mean, there's a book, day in the life for everything. It took me 10 seconds to find a day in the life of Luther, a day in the life of Marilyn Monroe, a day in the life of a teacher. I bet that's a good one. A day in the life of Oscar the Grouch, a day in the life of frogs, a day in the life of the Beatles. There's just gobs and gobs and gobs of these a day in the life. And not just people, but there's like a day in the life of America, a day in the life of Irishmen. There's a day in the life of everything. And so if you've ever read these books, you get these little snapshots, right? That's what the books are. Often they're just pictures. Picture snapshots of something that happens in a person's day that they're talking about. It's a picture, it's a snapshot telling of an important day in someone's life. Well, that is what we're going to do today. John lays out for us actually 13 I found another one, 13 pictures, of the day in the life of Jesus that we call Good Friday. And as we read through the Gospel of John 19, as we read through these pictures, it's going to become very clear to you that this was an eyewitness who was telling the story. And that these pictures have been just burned into John's mind. These pictures, but when John's writing the gospel, it's 30 or 40 years after the events. But when he tells the story, they are so literal in its details. There's so many beautiful little details that he includes that you just know that these pictures were just burned into his brain, and the sounds were burned into his ears, and the sights were burned into his eyes, and he just couldn't forget. And remember, we said when John wrote this gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke had already been written, but none of these pictures were in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. It's like John said, these things are so important for everyone to know that what went on this day, this most important day in history, that everyone needs to know who Jesus really is and what he really did. And so he gives us these 13, maybe more, but in my brain I came up with 13 pictures, of what happened that day, a day in the life of Jesus. So there's two important truths about these 13 pictures, right? And John himself says it. In John 19, verse 35, he says, the man who saw it, and he's talking about the crucifixion, all the things that happened before verse 35 in John 19. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. Now, you John scholars know that John often talked about himself in the third person like that, didn't he? He often calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved instead of just calling himself by his name. Most everyone believes that when John is saying this, he's talking about himself. And John is saying, listen, what I'm telling you right now is not something that I heard from someone who heard from someone who heard from someone's sister whose third cousin told them about something they saw on that day. Right? He said, no. I saw these things with my own eyes, and I testify that these things are true. Because I'm sure there were rumors 40 years after going around about the things that happened and the things that didn't happen, right? Did Jesus really die? Was he really crucified? Who was to blame? All these rumors and things spreading. And John says, listen, I saw it, and I testify that these things are true. And I testify so that you can believe. So the two things that he really wants us to understand and get about this is that the person who's writing this is an eyewitness. Now, I don't know if you really ever just appreciate how blessed we are that we have an eyewitness testimony of the crucifixion. Right? Think about Matthew. Matthew wasn't there. He deserted. He ran away. Think about Mark. He wasn't there. He wasn't one of the 12 disciples. Think about Luke. He wasn't there. He researched all of this afterwards, right? Who is the only one that gives us eyewitness testimony? It wasn't St. Paul. He wasn't there. It was John. How blessed we are that we don't have to rely on what we think happened on that day, but we can rely on eyewitness testimony of someone who was there and witnessed it with his own eyes. So important and valuable to us. When critics want to kind of hammer the Christians for what we believe about the death and resurrection of Christ, the one thing they cannot say is that it's myth or legend that developed over time. They can't say that because we have an eyewitness who was there, who saw it with his own eyes. So important, everyone, right? So important. So the first thing we need to remember is a person was an eyewitness, and second, the purpose for what it was written. John wrote this so that we may believe. You could argue that John chapter 19 is the penultimate chapter of the whole Gospel of John. Remember what he said in John 20? He said, these things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing you may have life in his name. The whole purpose of the Gospel of John was that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ. And John 19 is the eyewitness testimony that was written for us so that we might believe that Jesus died and rose again on Easter. Right? So essential as we start the Gospel of John that we keep in mind these two things. An eyewitness with the purpose of telling us so that we might believe these things are true. Not make-believe, not pretend, not fairy tale, not Mother Goose, right? But real life events that happen to a real person in our real world. All right, everybody? Have to start with that. Now we can get into the pictures, right? John starts off on the day in the life of Jesus Christ with the first picture of flogging. 19 verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. I don't know if you know much about what a Roman flogging entailed, but I gave you a picture of what a Roman cat o' nine tails would look like. You can see there that there are little pieces of lead. There's little sheep bone shards. There are little lead spikes in there. The cat o' nine tails was designed to inflict maximum pain, maximum damage. The little spikes were put into cat o' nine tails so that it would actually tear away the flesh. As you would be hit with that spike and as it would be pulled back, you would pull off a little chunk of skin and flesh along with it. The little lead balls and the lead spikes were meant to bruise the bone. So it was a double damaging sort of thing. It was one that would tear and it was one that would bruise. Now, you may have heard that generally the maximum amount that someone could be beaten with the cat o' nine tails was 39 lashes. Do you know where the number 39 came from? Because it was said that 40 would kill a person. So they would flog someone to the point of death, one lash short of death, right? So this is how John starts the picture. And it's interesting. He doesn't explain any of this. He just says, Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. It's like so casually he throws it out there, isn't it? It's like he doesn't even spend time talking about how awful this one little thing at the start of it all would have been already. And you know why he didn't have to explain it? Because everybody in that day knew. Everybody in that day knew what a flogging was like because they'd heard the screams, right? They'd seen those who have lived through it, what their back looked like, the scars, and how long it took someone to recover from something like that. He didn't have to explain how awful a flogging was because everybody knew. The Romans were good at this. The Romans used this to control the people. That was just the way they did in those days. It was through torture and pain that they controlled the will of the people. 39 lashes. Now, an anomaly is this, that Jesus was both flogged and crucified. Generally, you never got both. It was one or the other. If someone was going to be crucified, right, they were not often flogged. In fact, that was very rare because the point of a crucifixion was to get someone to live as long as possible hanging on that cross so that they would be an example to everyone about the crime that they were being punished for, so that everyone would see that they don't want to commit that crime, to rebel against the Romans. This is what happens. And so they tried to make that crucifixion last as long as possible so they wouldn't flog a person because they'd already be half dead from the flogging. But Jesus was both flogged and crucified. We'll talk about why that happened in a little bit, but it's just a little bit of an anomaly as John starts with that first picture. Now, you all know John was there for this as well. He witnessed this flogging, the whipping of Jesus, the beating of Christ, and it was a picture he couldn't get out of his head. Do you think you could? Listen, if you've ever seen The Passion of Christ, that's about as close as you're ever going to get to what a real flogging is like. And I saw it once, and I promised myself I would never watch it again. It was terrible. You have the video? I'm not coming over to watch it. I mean, I'm really glad I saw it, but I'll never watch it again. You know, I just don't need to. So why? Why one word? Why was the flogging? The flogging was a political thing. We're going to find out in a little bit that Pilate didn't want to have Jesus crucified. Right? He knew he was an innocent man, but he wanted to do all he could to not have him crucified, so thought if he just beat him up a little bit, bloodied him a little bit, and showed him how weak and helpless he was, that the Jews would back off. So he has him flogged because of a political reason to save his own skin, to avert a riot. The second picture John gives us then, after this terrible flogging comes the taunting. Luke, it says in John 19, and then I also added what Luke said about this. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, and they put it on his head. And they clothed him in a purple robe, and they went up to him again and again and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Then Luke adds, they blindfolded Jesus as they struck him and said, "Who was it that struck you? If you're really the Son of God, you would know." Already beaten and bloody, now Jesus endures more beatings. It wasn't just the purple robe and the crown of thorns and the mockery, but you heard here they struck him over and over again. Fact, these Roman guards would play a game called the King's Game. This is it's literature, it's history, it's fact. They played this game called the King's Game, where they would do this. They would dress a prisoner in a robe and some sort of crown. It wasn't always a crown of thorns, but some sort of crown. And then they would play this game almost like kids play Marco Polo. They'd smack him with a stick. They'd hit him with a fist. They'd throw a rock at him, and they'd say, "Who hit you?" And they'd smack him and then say, "Who hit you?" They just played with the prisoner like a cat and a mouse. Again, just to put down and to hurt and to punish and to belittle. They played the King's Game with Jesus. And please don't miss John's picture of this again and again and again and again and again and again. And they struck him. And Luke says they spit on him. And they played a game, a King's Game with him. This picture is just burned into John's mind. He said, you've got to know this. 40 years later, you got to know what Jesus did for you. Picture 3, Jesus before Pilate and the crowd. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "I'm bringing him out to you to let you know I don't find any basis for charges against him, none at all." And when he came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." Can you imagine already what Jesus must have looked like? See, this was Pilate's plan. To beat him up as much as possible, to bloody him as much as possible, to humiliate him as much as possible, to put the purple robe of a king and a crown of thorns on his head and march him out in front of the people and say, "Ta-da, here's your man." So I was wondering, what was Pilate trying to say? Look, what an amazing specimen of a man. Look, what a great king you have. No, that's not at all it, was it? He was trying to say, look at this pathetic, worthless, meaningless, powerless man. What are you afraid of? Why do you want me to crucify him? He is no threat. Look at him. Just look at him. Does he look threatening to you? Does he look scary to you? Does he look like a king to you? Do you really need to have him crucified? Do you see where this is going for Pilate? In the Gospels, it's interesting. Pilate pronounces Jesus innocent 7 times. 7 times. If you look at all 4 Gospel accounts of this, 7 times Pilate says Jesus is innocent. So I think you can tell that he really is trying to, at this point in time, spare his life, right? From killing who he knows is an innocent man. So why didn't he release him? Because Pilate is a coward. He's more interested in protecting his position as governor than killing an innocent man. We're going to learn more about that as that trial goes on with Jesus. But he didn't want to face the consequences. So again, what an incredible picture. John standing there with the crowd, looking up at Jesus in the robe and the crown of thorns, Pilate mocking him. That picture is just in John's mind. Then after that, Pilate takes Jesus in alone. And isn't it a little interesting exchange? He said, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize that I have the power either to set you free or to crucify you?" And Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jews kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." This is, again, a picture that you just have to try and get in your head, right? It's amazing. Here's Jesus with his back torn open, wearing a shameful robe, a crown of thorns, the crowd's against him, the Roman government is against him, and Pilate says, "I've got the power in this situation." And Jesus looks him in the eye and says, "You're wrong. You have no power. You would have no power because God has the power, and it's God who brought me here." It looks like Jesus is powerless. It looks like Pilate is powerful, but it's just the opposite, isn't it? It is just the opposite. Nelson?
Well, and also I think that Pilate was blackmailed by Caiaphas too. Caiaphas said he would go to Rome, even go to all the way to Rome himself and tell the emperor.
Nelson's making a good point that Pilate was under a lot of political pressure. You know, he had been told in no uncertain terms to put down any riots, right? To put down any insurrections. And he didn't want one of those things to happen. So you're right, Nelson. He was under a lot of pressure. But isn't it interesting? He thinks he's got all the power. And Jesus just reminds him, no, you don't. God's in control here. God has the power. So I was thinking, as believers, we desperately need to understand this biblical view of life, that a person has no power except that which is given him or her from above. Listen, friends, it may not seem like that sometimes in life. You know, it may seem like you don't, but God is in control. Sometimes we think as long as things are good, that means God's in control. But if things are bad, then we think God has no power, that God's lost control of things. You know that's not true, right? God is never not in control. God is always in control. Even in the hard, even the difficult, even in the awful bad things, God is working through that to always accomplish his plan, his purpose, in his time and his way. God is never out of control. We're going to see as we march through this trial that God is in control of every step of every way as this moves to the cross. So, picture 5 is Gabbatha, the stone pavement. This is a picture of what it would have looked like in Jesus' day. Now, again, if you're familiar with the Temple Mount, right, the Jewish temple in Jerusalem was this big walled edifice that stood on the top of all of Jerusalem. And the northeast corner, the Romans built a little fortress called the Fortress of Antonio. And there was a tower there. And from the Tower of Antonio, they could look into the courtyard of the Jewish temple to see what was going on. They were never allowed to go in there. No Gentiles were allowed, but they could always see from the top of the tower down into the Jewish courtyard of the Temple of Jerusalem. And outside of the fortress, between the temple and between the fortress, was this stone pavement. It was like a street. And you can see the picture here, right? On that pavement, on that street, there was a chair where the judge, Pilate, would sit to rule or to make his judgments. So whenever there was a case or whenever there was an accusation, it was there at the stone pavement that the judgment would be pronounced. Now, what I like about this is, how many of you have been to Israel before? right? I bet you've been here to this, right? This is today, the Gabbatha stone pavement. You know, the streets of Jerusalem that day are now like 15 to 20 feet underground. So to get here, you've got to walk down these little stairs, right? And then you can actually stand right, if you look, these are the exact same stones, the exact pavement that Jesus would have stood on as he was hearing the pronouncement of his crucifixion from Pilate. People that visit Israel, I haven't been, but people who visit Israel tell me that this is the most moving spot in all of their Israel tour, right? I've heard people say that because you can imagine that one of those stones is the very stone where Jesus himself stood as he was on trial by Pilate and the Jews, right? Isn't that something? Still there to this day. So when Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat there at the stone pavement, and he said, "Here's your king." Pilate said to the Jews, but they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar." And notice who says that. The chief priests answered. That is just full of meaning, isn't it? Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So here is where Jesus heard the words. This is it. This is where he heard the words, "You're going to be crucified." He'd known it would happen for days, for weeks, for months, for eternity. But here is where he heard the words on the stone pavement, "You will be crucified." Here's where John heard those words. They must have been just torched into his mind and into his ears. How could he ever not hear those words ringing into his mind, into his ears? Here's where Jesus heard the words, "You will be crucified." There's a principle here, and I think it still applies today. If you look at what's going on here, the closer we get to the cross, the more clearly we see who people really are. Right? See if you follow my logic here. The closer we're getting to the cross, the more people are revealing their true character. We're seeing who they really are. Pilate, he tries to be fair and just, and he tries to look like he's so magnanimous. But in the light of the cross, he looks like a political coward, doesn't he? In the end, he washes his hands in the water as if to say he is not guilt, that the blood of this man is not on his hands, when he knows full well that the blood of that man, innocent man, is on his hands. We see his true colors here, don't we? The closer we get to the cross, the more we see who people really are. Or how about this? The religious leaders. They try to appear so holy, but in the light of the cross, they just look like self-important power mongers, don't they? All they care about is keeping their position, keeping their power. They don't care about an innocent man's death. All they want is to be crucified. And they go so far as to say that they have no king but Caesar when they do not in any way, shape, or form recognize Caesar as their king. It is the biggest lie. It's the biggest bit of hypocrisy and blasphemy ever uttered in this whole trial. We have no king but Caesar, say the high priests. Wow. We're starting to see the character the closer they get to the cross. But in case we're busy pointing fingers, get ready for an ouch. The closer I get to the cross, the closer I see who I really am too. You know what I mean? Closer we get to the cross, the more we see who we really are. The blinding light of truth shines from the cross, and it shows us for who we really are. So I can compare myself to other people around me, and I think I'm a pretty good guy. But when I stand at the foot of the cross, I realize I'm not a pretty good guy. I see all my sins, all my mistakes, all my failures. I recognize my brokenness and my need for him. I recognize his great love for me. Do you see the cross then pointed out people's true character? And it still does today. It shows us who we really are. Why did Jesus have to die? It wasn't because of anything he'd done. It wasn't because he deserved it. Why did Jesus have to die? For you and me. See, the cross, it just drops us to our knees in humility, and it makes us realize who we really are. Poor, miserable sinners. Jesus himself said this. He said, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. You might think that you're getting away with some sort of sin in your life. You might think nobody knows those thoughts in your head. You might think that nobody knows what you look at night on your computer, or how you do your taxes, or what you really think about someone that you hate and just wish they were dead. You know, you may think nobody knows, but God does. And the closer you get to the cross, the more open and revealing those things become. Right? That's what the cross does. And he still loves us. Picture 6. The verdict has been rendered. The mock fake trials have been held. And now it's time for the crucifixion. Jesus, already in his weakened, beaten state, is forced to carry the cross. 1917, John said, another picture, carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull. In Aramaic, it's called Golgotha. Now, you know that, the pictures we see of Jesus carrying like a cross is not really accurate. They didn't carry like a whole cross like we often see in movies or art. It was the cross beam. It was the one beam you can see in the picture. It's just the long beam. The horizontal beam would be what they were forced to carry, because the pole that went into the ground was always there at the place of crucifixion. Those poles always stayed, right? They were in the ground, And again, the whole thing that when we see a crucifixion, that the cross is on the ground and then they kind of lift it up, that's not the way it worked either. There was a pole already in the ground, and the cross beam, would be raised up on top and attached to the pole that was already there. So the point I'm making is the picture that Jesus carrying this cross beam, right? That was a big old chunk of wood. The condemned man was forced to carry that beam weighing about 110 pounds from the prison to the place of the execution. And the Romans, again, remember the purpose of a crucifixion was to make a public spectacle of the death and torture of the victim. So the soldiers would often have the person march a big old route, right, around the cross to parade him through the city so that everybody could have a chance to to shout, to jeer, to throw, to spit, whatever they needed to do to this criminal on the way to the cross. Well, John doesn't say this, but the other gospel writers tell us that Jesus was so weak at this point that he couldn't even carry that cross. Remember? So they had to pull someone from the crowd, Simon, and he had to take that cross to the rest of to Golgotha for Jesus, because he was already in such a weakened state. Picture 7, Jesus is crucified. Again, it's just, John just so flippantly throws it out there. Here they crucified him with 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. There's no details. There's nothing that tells us how horrible and horrific this was. Why did he not have to mention that? Because every single person who was reading this knew what a crucifixion looked like. The Romans once crucified hundreds of Jews on the street on the way into Jerusalem. Hundreds, right? So that on the way to Jerusalem to go to the temple worship, you would walk past hundreds of people, one cross after another, of someone dying and being tortured to death on a cross. Everybody knew what a crucifixion was like. He didn't have to tell them. He just says, and they crucified him. Well, we're going to talk a little more about what it really means in a minute. But do you hear also the picture of an eyewitness? They didn't just crucify him, but they crucified him with 3 others. And Jesus was in the middle with one on each side. Question? Observation.
I've heard that the crucifixion, the person being crucified was humiliated. He was completely stripped down. He didn't have clothes on.
You're 4 slides ahead of me, but you are correct. It was the Romans were good at this. It wasn't just pain, it was humiliation. And so, yeah, that's coming. So hold that thought. All right, so it's the picture of an eyewitness again. Now, again, we want to talk about this crucifixion thing. You know, the Romans didn't invent crucifixion. The Phoenicians had done it long before, right? And the Phoenicians crucified for 2 reasons. Just the whole public spectacle of a thing, but they also worshiped the god of the earth. And they thought that anybody who was evil or a criminal that would die touching the earth would curse the earth. So they wanted to kill people up above from touching the earth. Right? That was the Phoenicians' way of sacrificing to their gods, the criminals, right? The Romans, their purpose, we talked about this already, was to curb crime, to control the masses, to shame and humiliate, to make an example of someone so that others would not repeat that offense. The Jews thought of crucifixion as the most terrible, horrible thing, the worst way to die. I think I have a verse in your outline that says, "Cursed is anyone who dies on a tree," right? You know, that was their thought. It was the worst way to die. However, Christians, isn't it something what we've done to the cross? Now, again, I'm not saying it's bad to wear a cross. I don't think it is at all. I think it's a good thing, right? But look at how we have changed the cross into something of humiliation and torture, into a symbol of love and forgiveness and of what God did for us in Christ. You know, if anyone from the first century came here tonight and saw you wearing a cross, they would go, "What on earth are you doing?" That would make no sense to them, right? You know what I'm saying? It would make 0 sense to them. But we've changed the cross, haven't we, from a symbol of torture to a symbol of love. And I think sometimes we forget when we wear our crosses that it's not just jewelry that you're wearing, right? A cross is a statement, isn't it? When you wear the cross, it's a statement of what you believe. It's a statement of what Jesus did for you. It's a statement of who you are, isn't it? Right? And I'm afraid we forget that sometimes. You know, it's just become a sort of decoration or artwork. So let's talk about the art of crucifixion. What I'm going to do for you now is I'm going to play just an old tape that I have from Dr. Alex Metherell. He had his, he's an MD. He has his advanced degree in muscular bio something. Muscular, how the muscles work under stress. That's his area. And he talks about what happens in a crucifixion. He talks about the things that happen and the art form that the Romans turned a crucifixion into. So take a second and listen to this, would you?
Well, it began on Thursday evening after the Last Supper. Jesus went with his disciples to the Mount of Olives, to the Garden of Gethsemane, and there, if you remember, he prayed all night. Now, during that process, he was anticipating the coming events of the next day, and knowing the amount of suffering that he was going to go through, was going through a great deal of psychological stress. And as we're told, he sweat blood. Now, this is a known medical condition. It's called hematidrosis. It's very uncommon, but it's associated with a high degree of psychological stress. And it comes about because of breakdown of the capillaries in the sweat glands. And so there is a small amount of bleeding into the sweat glands so that the sweat comes out tinged with blood. We're not talking about a lot of blood here. It's just a very, very small amount. But what it does is it sets up the skin to be very fragile so that the next day, when he was flogged by the Roman centurion, the skin was very, very sensitive and fragile. And the flogging usually consisted of 39 lashes, but frequently was a lot more than that, depending upon the mood of the centurion applying the blows. And he would use a whip which would have leather thongs which had tied into them pieces of metal which, when the whip would strike the flesh, would cause deep bruises or contusions. And it would also have woven into the braiding, some sharp, jagged pieces of bone. And the sharp bone would cut the flesh deeply. So the flogging was extremely brutal, to the point where, in fact, probably the bone itself of the ribs and the spinous process from the spine would be exposed in the deep, deep cuts. And many people would, in fact, die before even getting to the crucifixion. And from the account that we read, it's evident that the whipping was particularly severe because he was not able to carry the cross to Calvary, and somebody had to help him. And we know then when he got to Calvary, he would have been laid down on the ground with the horizontal beam that had been carried there, and he would have had his hands nailed to the beam with his arms in the outstretched position. And the nail would look something like this, but instead of going through the palm, where a lot of artists and painters show it, it actually went through the wrist. We know it went through here because this was a solid position that would lock the hand. If it went through here, when hanging on the cross, the nail would tear through the palm and one would fall off the cross. So it went through here, which in the language of the day, this was considered the hand as well. Now, the interesting thing is that this goes through a point where the median nerve runs, which is the largest nerve going out to the hand, and the nail would crush the median nerve, which is something equivalent to taking, if you bang your elbow and hit your funny bone, you know how excruciating that pain is. Imagine taking a pair of pliers and crushing that nerve, the ulnar nerve, which is the funny bone. The effect would be similar to that in crushing the median nerve going through the wrist. So the pain was absolutely excruciating. The word excruciating comes from the word out of the cross. The pain is so bad, the only description is the kind of pain one suffers in a crucifixion. Now, at the same time, he also had nails placed through his feet. And likewise, nerves in the feet would be crushed, and there would be a similar type of pain in the feet. And so the whole process is extremely painful. And then at this point, going up into the vertical position, because of the loading on the arms would immediately be stretched, probably about 6 inches in length, and both shoulders would become dislocated, which would fulfill the Old Testament prophecy in Psalm 22, which describes the crucifixion, which says, "My bones are out of joint." And once up in the vertical position, the process of death by crucifixion is essentially a death by slow suffocation, because it is difficult to breathe out while hanging with such a load on the arms. So it's necessary to push up on one's feet to breathe out. And in doing so, the nail in the foot would then tear through the foot, eventually locking up against the tarsal bones. And then one would breathe out and then be able to relax down and take another breath in. And this process would go on until complete exhaustion would take over and one wouldn't be able to breathe anymore. As one slows down the breathing, one goes into what's called respiratory acidosis. The retained carbon dioxide in the blood is dissolved as carbonic acid, causing increased acidosis of the blood. This leads to heart failure, and the heart failure results in an effusion, a pericardial effusion in the sac around the heart. And there's probably also a pleural effusion in the space around the outside of the lung. So that just before the point of death, with the acidosis increasing, this would then lead to terminal arrhythmias in the heart. And at this point, Jesus knew that he was at the moment of death, which is when he was then able to say, "O Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit," and then he died. Now, a short time after, the Roman centurion came around, and being fairly certain that Jesus was dead at this point, he confirmed it by thrusting his spear into his right side. And it was probably his right side, that's not certain, but from the description, it was probably the right side between the ribs. The spear probably went through the right lung and into the heart, into either the right atrium or the right ventricle, and puncturing the sac around the heart as well. So when the spear was pulled out, a clear fluid, the pericardial effusion and the pleural effusion, which was a clear fluid with the appearance of water, came out, followed by a large volume of blood. And this is in fact what we see described by John in his gospel. So at this point, there was absolutely no doubt that he was totally dead.
I've heard that. Am I on? Test, test. I've heard that a lot of times, that tape. And every time I hear it, I'm like, why? Why? Why would he do that? Because in a second, he could have stopped it, right? With a word, Jesus could have said no more. You know, all he would have had to do was just get off the cross and end it all. But he didn't. He went through all of that for you and me. And this is the picture that John has in his mind that he shares with us. That whole crucifixion. That Jesus did that for you and for me. The power of the cross. Oswald Chambers had this powerful statement. He said, all of heaven was interested in the cross of Christ. All of hell was terribly afraid of it, while men are the only beings who more or less ignore its meaning. Isn't that profound? All of heaven, all of hell is extremely moved by the cross of Christ. But we go through life without even thinking about it. We move through life as if it's just a story of 2,000 years ago, and we miss the sacrifice of the Son of God on the cross for each and every one of us. It amazes me that the cross doesn't overwhelm my life every day. You know what I mean? Why am I not every day on my knees? Why am I not every day thanking God for the cross? Why do I not every day say, I'm going to do all I can today to thank God for what he did for me, for what he gave me? But I don't. I get caught up in life. I get caught up in things, and I just move sometimes and forget the power of the cross and the sacrifice of Christ. You? What's worse is there are so many in the world who never even give the cross a second thought. They never think about the one who loves them the most and how great that love is, right? We have just a responsibility to tell the world about the cross of Christ and what it means for them and what he did for them. The power of the cross. Let's not miss it. Let's not just think about it on Good Friday. You know, let's keep the picture that John has given us of the crucifixion in our minds so we can appreciate what he did for us. The eighth picture then is the sign. 1919, Pilate had a notice prepared and it read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And we know that sign was written in 3 languages. I put a little picture here of what that might have looked like. You see the Hebrew on the top. You see the Latin in the middle and the Greek on the bottom, right? Written in 3 different languages. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And doesn't it amaze you how quickly John went past the crucifixion? It just says, and they crucified him. But what does he focus on? He focuses on this sign. I'm like, what? Why the sign? Right? But he pictures the sign, not the nails, not the blood, not the torture, not the pain, not the suffering, but the sign. Why? Usually, the sign would clearly say what the person was guilty of. But John says the sign only said King of the Jews. It didn't say traitor. It didn't say blasphemer. It didn't charge him with any other crime. It just said it was a statement, the King of the Jews. Now, why is that so important to John? You guys think, what was John's purpose? What did John want more than anything for us to know and see? Who Jesus really is. And for John, the sign on the cross is a statement to the world in Hebrew, in Latin, in Greek, that were all the known languages at that time, at that place, that everyone could see who Jesus really was. Not a traitor, not a blasphemer, not guilty of some crime against Rome, some crime against the Jews, but it was a statement that dying here on the cross was the King of the Jews, the Messiah, the Christ, the promised one who came from the Jewish nation. It was a statement for John. The sign is important to him. Reading on, he said, many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic and Latin and Greek. The chief priests and the Jews protested to Pilate, don't say the King of the Jews, but write that he claimed to be the King of the Jews. But Pilate, in his one shining moment of bravery, stands up and says, no, what I have written, I have written. And he let it stand. This is the King of the Jews. The sign was so important to John because it perfectly illustrates the whole reason John wrote his gospel. It shows us who Jesus really is. It's remarkable, isn't it? Nowhere else do we see who Jesus, the Son of God, really is better, clearer than on the cross. The true nature of Christ, the true love of Christ is seen here more than in any miracle he performed, more than any parable that he told, more than any other way that he treated people. It's on the cross that we truly see the heart of God for you and me, right? It is without doubt the single most incredible expression of love that our world has ever known. That the God, the creator of the universe, would take flesh, humble himself, and be crucified. The cross shows us who Jesus really is. Have you ever seen in church the INRI on the cross? Do you know what that means? Those are the first 4 letters of the Latin Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Jesus Nazareth Rex Iudis. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The first 4 letters in Latin, the sign. 3 things we learn about who Jesus really is from this sign. First, there is no circumstance that can diminish the power of who Jesus is. You can kill him. You can nail him to a cross, right? You can mock him with thorns and a purple robe. You can whip him, but you can't take away who he really is and what he is really doing. No circumstance can diminish the power of who Jesus is. Second, the world can truly see who he is. For the cross, he is lifted up for all to see, in a sign above his head who he is, the King, the expected Savior of the Jews. And 3, people will try, but they will always fail to change the truth about who Jesus is. It started immediately when the religious leaders said to Pilate, just change it. Change the sign. Don't say he was the king of the Jews. Say he claimed to be the king of the Jews. And ever since that moment, people have been trying to diminish the cross. People have been trying to spin the cross. People have been trying to change what Jesus did, who he was, and what happened there on the cross, to make light of it or to say it was not real or true. And still, after all these years, the cross is still the most powerful symbol in the world, isn't it? Still. People will try, but always fail to change the truth about who Jesus is. Picture 9, the casting of the lots. As Jesus is being crucified, the soldiers say, let's not tear his undergarment. Let's decide by lot who will get it. Now, this happened so that scripture might be fulfilled, which said, they divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. So here John introduces a new little twist to his pictures that he gives us. Now, John shows us the pictures that the picture was not random, but the picture, all the things that were happening were prophesied, were predicted hundreds of years ago, and that what was happening in front of his very eyes was not things spinning wildly out of control, but was the fulfillment of the plan of God that had been revealed already hundreds of years earlier. The dividing of the clothes wasn't just some soldiers throwing dice to see who gets the Jesus undergarment, but it was proof that God had a plan long ago and that all of this would happen. Do you see? At the cross, even the most common event becomes the fulfillment of prophecy. If any of you would like, I made a copy here of 28 prophecies, 28 Old Testament prophecies that literally came true on the morning that Jesus was crucified. 28 Old Testament predictions of what Jesus did that were fulfilled in his crucifixion. I made 25 copies of this. It's over on the table if you want to grab one on the way out. And if we run out, let me know. I'll make more. But that's just 28 prophecies of the crucifixion. Right? The point is, none of this is happening by accident. Right? All of this is God's working to accomplish the plan that he started already in the garden when he said that the serpent, right, would be crushed by Jesus' heel, but he would wound him in the process. From the beginning, it was all coming to the head, to the fulfillment. Even the little things are all part of God's plan. So think about this. Arlo brought this up a little earlier. If they're gambling for Jesus' undergarment, the shocking thing is this means Jesus would have been naked, humiliated before the world, hanging on the cross. You don't ever see pictures like that, do you? Yeah, we just don't. I mean, we don't want to scare the kids, right? Like a crucifixion doesn't scare them enough anyway. But, it was total humiliation, isn't it, that was going on there. Another indelible picture for John. Jesus suffering the agony, the excruciating agony of the cross while the soldiers gamble for his clothing right in front of him. Fulfilling Scripture. Yeah.
For those of us that are a little bit older, we never heard this part of the story in Bible class. Never. Never heard about the excruciating, about the nakedness, about, they said, oh, it was bad, but it was never to the point where it bothered a person. I think what really did it was passion. I think that's what brought it
It changed a lot of things.
prior to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a pleasant thing to talk about, so we don't. And it's funny how each denomination kind of picks a different part that they emphasize. Like Catholics always have a bloody Jesus, don't they? I'm not saying always, almost always. They have a crucified Jesus on the cross with the nails and the blood, right? That's just the way they roll. It's a crucifix. Lutheran churches, you hardly ever see a crucifix, do you? Right. No, I'm not saying we're right and they're wrong. I'm saying we emphasize different things. Lutherans emphasize the resurrection of Christ. Lutherans emphasize that he is alive, that he is risen from the dead. Hallelujah, right? That's our emphasis. But others put a lot more into the death of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ. Like, the Catholics have the Stations of the Cross. They're just so much more into what we're talking about. The incredible sacrifice that Christ made for us. That's just a bigger focus for them than it is for us. Now again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. And Dennis, you bring up a good point. It's not something we talk a lot about. Some do. Episcopalians. Yep. So I think it's good that we talk about it, don't you? Like, did you know the word excruciating is from the Latin word ex, which means out of, and crux is the word for cross in Latin. So excruciating literally means out of the cross. Excruciating is a pain that only comes from a crucifixion, that intense kind of a pain. Did you know that? Excruciating. That's where that comes from the pain of a cross, right? So maybe we're learning. Picture 10 is the Mother Mary at the cross. Near the cross stood his mother. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved, Jesus said to his mother, "Dear woman, here is your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, the disciples took her into his home. The disciple took her into his home. Isn't that amazing? John was telling me earlier that, and I agree, even with the terrible pain on the cross, Jesus was only thinking of others. He forgave those who were crucifying him. He welcomed the thief into paradise. He arranged care for his mother. Just think about it. He's dying an unjust, painful death that he did not deserve. Wouldn't you think he would be like lashing out or being a little angry or a little bitter about things? Saying, "Poor me, I don't deserve this," or something? But he doesn't. It's all about caring for others, even in his worst moment. There's a lesson there, isn't it? A point that Jesus loves the world, but he cares about me. He cares about you. So I want you to take this home with you, right? Jesus didn't die for the world. Jesus died for you. When Jesus was on the cross, he was thinking about you and his mother and about the thief next to him and about those who were crucifying him, who were gambling for his clothes. He's always thinking about others. That's the whole purpose of what he's doing here, isn't it? Picture 11 is this drink of sour wine. Knowing that everything was now completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." Did you hear? John did it again. He says that Jesus said these words for a reason, not just because he was thirsty, but why did Jesus say these words? What did it say? He said this so the scripture would be fulfilled. Jesus knew that this promise had been made in the Old Testament. And by saying these words, that he is thirsty, he was literally fulfilling what the Father said would happen so many years before. Right? You follow? So Jesus cried out, "I thirst," in order to fulfill prophecy.
Can you please back up to verse 25 and explain to me how many Marys we had there?
Oh. Yeah, there's a lot of Marys. Like, what do you want to know about the Marys?
Well, I've got it down as 3 different Marys were at the crucifixion. Now, I don't know if that's right or not.
So at the cross of Jesus stood his mother. That's one Mary.
Mary.
His mother's sister. That's Mary, the wife of Clopas. That's the
is
second Mary.
That's the same person.
Yes, and then there's Mary Magdalene. So there's 3 Marys,
Okay,
right?
that's what I got.
Just like today, everybody's named Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Popular name, right? All right, so don't miss this. I really thought this was cool. There's many, many prophecies that were fulfilled that Jesus had nothing to do with. I'll get you in a second. But in this case, John points out that Jesus remembered the scripture, and in order to fulfill it and be obedient to God, he did a little thing on the cross like saying, I'm thirsty. So again, what's Jesus thinking about when he's dying on the cross? He's thinking about other people, and he's thinking about fulfilling his Father's will in Scripture, right? I do have to, so people can hear you.
Who was Clopas?
I do not know that.
Okay.
Anybody know who Clopas is? I don't. Pardon? Husband of Mary, yeah. I'm not sure who Clopas is. Maybe we'll find out in The Chosen.
Supposedly was a sister.
A sister, but what about Clopas? Who was he? Okay, he's on it.
I am isn't the I am statement. I am thirsty. He isn't making an I am.
He is.
He's saying God is
It's an
thirsty.
ego eimi.
It is.
I only am.
I am. Okay.
Yep. Did I see another hand? All right. So the thirst thing, there's been a lot that's been made of this, talked about this, but the point is that John makes is it's again fulfilled prophecy, right? All of this is happening for a reason. Picture 12 is the actual death. When Jesus had received the drink, he said, "It is finished." And with that, he bowed his head and he gave up his spirit. John, the eyewitness, remembers this picture perhaps more than any other. Jesus hanging his head and giving and breathing his last. And he uses this wonderful word, tetelestai. That's the Greek word for it is finished, tetelestai. It's a word that points not to the end of something, but to the completion of something, right? So it means that the debt is paid. The project is finished. The goal is accomplished, right? Whatever was attempted was completed and done and over with, completely. It is finished, right? So the way I like to think of it, tetelestai is like the cry of a carpenter who's working on a project. He's got a table and a set of chairs that he's been working on for weeks. He's been carefully, cutting and nailing and sanding and gluing and preparing this project. And when it is finished, the carpenter shouts out, tetelestai. It's done. Look at it. The project is completed. I'm finished. It's the cry of a shepherd, the shout of a shepherd after a hard day's work, when he gathers all the sheep into the sheep pen, and he counts them all, and they're all home safe again. And the shepherd shouts, tetelestai. It's done. The day is done. They're safe. They're in the pen. It's the shout of a victorious king who's won the battle, whose enemies have been defeated. And the king shouts, tetelestai. The war is over. The enemies are defeated. This is the cry of Jesus from the cross, the cry of a carpenter, the cry of a shepherd, the cry of a victorious king. He shouts, tetelestai. It's done. Nothing else needs to be done. Nothing else needs to be added. The task is finished. It's tetelestai.
I just remember that in back then in the marketplace, which is something that Jesus would be familiar with, when there was a deal made where somebody bought something, they paid the money, the saying was always, it is finished. There's nothing more. And, and Jesus is saying the same thing. It is finished, so we don't have to do anything but receive it.
Yeah.
The deal is done, So I love that at the end when he said that.
You are a good Lutheran. Way to go. Was there a hand in the back somewhere, did I see? I'll come up to you, Dennis.
Okay.
You going to tell us who Clopas is?
Clopas was supposed to be the brother of Joseph and the father of James the Less.
Joseph, the father of Jesus, Joseph?
Joseph, the father of Jesus,
Okay.
Joseph. So Mary's she's Mary's sister-in-law.
There you go. Now we know. Sister-in-law. There were 3 Marys there. That's what matters. All right, so don't you love the word? That word is a word that we need to keep in our hearts, right? Whenever we think that maybe we need to do something to get God to love us, whenever we think that maybe we need to perform in order to gain God's love and acceptance, whenever we think that we need to make a decision to follow Jesus before we can be saved, right? We need to hear, tetelestai. It is finished. The work is done. It is fully completed. There's nothing more that we need to do. He had done it all for us. That word is beautiful, tetelestai. And then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Those are simple words, aren't they? He gave up his spirit. But what does that mean? To me, it says that they didn't take Jesus' life from him. He gave up his spirit. He decided when he was going to go to the cross. He decided what it was going to say when he was on the cross. He decided when he was going to die. And he gave up his spirit. Isn't that something? Who's in control? Right? God is in control.
I have a question about when Jesus took on all of our sins. It said that, when he was on the cross, that his sins were on him. How did that work?
How did that work? Well, we talk about the great exchange, that God exchanged our sins for his righteousness. So really, when the innocent Lamb of God died with no sin, God said, I'm going to take that and give it to you. And when you and I sinned, God said, I'm going to take that and give it to Jesus. So on the cross, God made a switch, right? That's the best way I can explain it. Jesus took upon himself all our sin, and we took upon ourselves all of his righteousness. And that's a God thing. That's just what God did. That's not something we could do or any other person could do, but that was God making the great exchange of the cross. The sacrifice was the atonement for our sins. That's the best we can get out of that. Does that make sense or not?
It's just John didn't go into that.
Nope.
You get it from other
Sure.
writers, but
Yeah,
you don't see this happen. It's not.
for sure. John was not at all into doctrine, was he? Or, John was just all about, I want you to know who he is. I want you to know what he did. If you want to know how it happened, you go read St. Paul later. That's John, right? I don't care about that details. I just want you to know who he is and what he has done.
When I saw the Passion, the title, the song, I never knew how much it cost to take my sins upon the cross. I just kept hearing that over and over through that whole part. And what was interesting to me was when our granddaughter Abby realized that Jesus was on the cross naked. Her horror. It was, she was maybe 6 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not something we think about, is it? Yep. Are you starting to see, at least as we've been moving through this, the beauty of the pictures that John has laid out for us and how we're really able to understand what Jesus did for us as we see these pictures through the eyes of John? So they didn't have to break Jesus' legs with a club because he died quickly. But listen, it's not because he was weak that he died. It's not because of the beatings, but it's because he gave up his life at God's perfect intended moment. Right? Don't think that in any of this, he didn't have timing and purpose to everything he did. Even he decided to give up his spirit and die. Then the last picture I added was the spear to the side. I know 13 is not a good number. I was really working to get that down to 12, but I couldn't figure it out. They came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, and they didn't break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. Now, you know what we can do in this verse? We can read between the lines. 40 years after the crucifixion, there must have been people who said, Jesus never really died. That's why he's still walking around 3 days later. He didn't rise from the dead because he was never dead, right? That must have been one of the early sort of lies that were told about Jesus, that he never really died. So can you not hear in this that right after the spear, and as you heard Dr. Metherell say, through the heart, or through the rib cage, through the lung, into the heart, pulling it out again so that the pericardial fluid and the water would come out with the blood. There's no way you can live through that. There's no way you can live through that, especially after a crucifixion and a beating and a flogging, right? So, and then right after that, he says, listen, I saw it. I saw the spear. I saw the blood. I saw the water. I testify it's true. I know this is true. I'm an eyewitness. So don't believe the lies that he never died, right? Don't believe the lies. Can you hear that written there? The blood and the water show us two important things. One, that Jesus was really dead. You know, there are those who teach the swoon theory. You've heard this? This is what many Muslim children are taught about the death of Jesus. You know, that he just was unconscious on the cross. And when they laid him in the cool of the tomb, he revived and walked out alive. That's called the swoon theory, if you've ever heard it. Well, yeah, while the guards were watching, snuck away, all beaten, bloody, and a spear in his side, but he didn't die. And wrapped up, yeah, too, on top. And he folded up his things really nicely on the way out. So, you know, it's this, John, these pictures do a masterful job of telling us that Jesus really died. He wasn't in a coma. You know, he didn't pass out. He was truly dead. 3 days in the grave, right? Second, Jesus died of a heart that was pierced by his love for mankind. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, it wasn't the nails that held Christ to the cross, but it was love. Isn't that true? It's not the nails that he could have gotten down. It was love. You know, and his heart was pierced, not just by a spear, but by his love for you and me, and an unbelievable willingness to give it all for us. 13 amazing pictures from an eyewitness of the day that changed everything, the day Jesus died. So how does this awe-inspiring series of pictures at the cross fit into your ordinary routine life? I have 5 things for you to look through on your last page, right? Remember I said the cross isn't just 2,000 years ago, it's today. What does the fact that Jesus died for you do for you today? Well, picture victory over sin and temptation. Because Christ died for you, you are not going to suffer for your sins, are you? Right? He has washed away sin. Second, picture God's power as a part of your everyday life. There's power knowing that you're loved and forgiven. There's power knowing that heaven is your home. There's power knowing that you don't live for this world, but for the one to come because of what Jesus did for you. Third, picture yourself as a person of incredible faith. Right? We believe in a God who gave himself for us. And that faith moves us in how we live our lives. 4, picture the change in what's important to you. I don't know how you can contemplate what Jesus did for you on the cross and just think you're going to live like every day, live like everybody else. You're going to be different, aren't you? And 5, picture yourself forgiven and pure in God's sight. Here's a thought I have for you tonight. On your way out of church this evening, if you have 5 minutes, you want to just stop in the sanctuary and just sit and pray a little bit. If you want to just stop and sit down in a pew, I'm going to go up here in a second and just turn on the glory cross. And if you want to just sit down and think about the cross and the sacrifice that Christ made for you, feel free to stay as long as you want. But just take some time looking at our beautiful cross in our beautiful sanctuary and remember the beautiful sacrifice of Christ. And then guess what, everybody? Next week, the resurrection. Next week is Easter. All right, so God bless all of you, and I'm going to go up and get the sanctuary set.
Good night. Good night.
I had to give up the morning Bible study at lunch. I was done by